Welcome to TechSign Talks. We're here at ServiceNow's Knowledge event, the yearly conference of ServiceNow where they unveil all their new and latest innovations.
Yes.
We are here with Peter Russo. He's Vice President Core Business Workflows at ServiceNow. And I want to talk to you about your Core Business Suite, which you announced this week, because I have the feeling there's more to it than the press release and the keynote unveil, because it was pretty short and limited. What struck my was that you said it's a new AI-based approach to ServiceNow,
Yes.
which you can implement within several weeks.
Yes.
In most cases, there's
Yes.
always this in most cases, but
Always depends on the situation of the customer. Yeah.
But focusing on several weeks to me means you're going after a new audience, because if you want to implement in several weeks in enterprise organizations, that's usually never doable.
Sure.
So I was wondering, which are the markets you're going after? Are you going after mid-market, small business? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on the idea behind this
Sure.
new core business suite.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. So the first thing is basically we've took together all these critical kind of back office functions we were serving workflows to: HR, procurement, finance, supply chain, legal, facilities. We brought it all into one unit, right? So we could really innovate on top. And our initial product that we've delivered is Core Business Suite. And basically what we used to find is a lot of customers individually in procurement, we would sell procurement, individually we would sell HR, and typically they would start with request intake, because in all of those different lines of business, you need to take a request from an employee and then route it to the appropriate team in that department. So basically Core Business Suite takes request intake, case management, and success dashboards and applies it across all of those lines of business in one package. And the way that we do it really fast is we're using conversational AI. So you actually do chat with an AI bot to discuss which areas of line of business are you going to start to automate, what type of case types, what underlying systems do you need data from, and this actually revs up the whole configuration for the solution.
Okay. And how does that look like? Is it like a wizard? You know, I want to take data from, I don't know, Workday, and it will pop up and say, create an API connection, and
Yeah.
we'll pull in the data or something?
So I mean, we have over 370 pre-configured connections in Workflow Data Fabric. So essentially AIagents are leveraging those configurations that we have, the case types that we've built inside of these solutions to start the solution configuration rather than having to kind of manually do it.
And you have a lot of default dashboards then? Because
Yes.
if you want to implement within several weeks, you know, there should be a whole default product, I
Yes.
assume.
Yes, yes, exactly. So what you have in each line of business are essentially success dashboards.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of things like from request to resolution, which is something pretty standard actually across each line of business. That's baked into the dashboard out of the gate. And then of course, depending on how your team works, how you measure yourselves, you can always start to configure exactly what you need on top.
But is this just a bundling of things you already had, or did you also make something new to make this bundle happen?
Sure. So, I mean, basically the idea came across is that if you're familiar with global business services, it's kind of a model that really big companies will start to centralize talent from these individual business functions. And that's a huge transformation. You need to be a big company with a lot of money to do that type of transformation. And a lot of them are doing it on ServiceNow. So this is like Exxon, or we had Siemens speaking today, Standard Charter, you know, the list goes on and on. So what we did with this product, though, is by packaging it all together, request and case management, cross line of business in one product, is we bundled it and kind of democratized the GBS model for customers of any size. So you could get going really fast with request and case management, but then the add-on to that is really deep workflows that we do in each line of business. So once you have request and case management for HR, you bring immediate value to the request hitting your HR desk, but then you might want to tackle hire to retire, or in procurement, the whole source to pay process. Then that's our really deep extended workflows that we have beyond what we have in the core business suite. So the way I like to think about it is it's basically a foundation to start to unify the employee experience, the request to intake into any line of business, and then you can start to extend into these really kind of complex processes that we deliver in each line of business.
Okay, and for our readers who might be interested in this,
Sure.
is the license limited to the core business suite? And if you want to extend, you need to
Yeah, so
you need to buy a different license.
Exactly.
Or is it all included? Or
so the
how should I
first
look at it?
license is request and case management,
Okay.
anywhere in the business, really quick to deploy. And then what I imagine will happen is customers will start to think, where do I have the most pain in a process? Is it source to pay? Is it in finance operations? And then they might start to go deeper in those areas. And those are extended solution. There's a separate product SKU for everything there.
Okay. And who's the target customer? Because usually you go after the enterprise companies,
Sure.
but I assume you want to go a bit lower this time with
This is really interesting. So the way that it's packaged, and again, this kind of democratizing of GBS, is that it's certainly available and it's priced for a commercial customer, so more kind of mid-market in standard terms outside of ServiceNow. But at the same time, customers that want to do like what they saw from Siemens, right? They can have this SKU that handles everything for request intake and the extended workflows on top of that. So the products kind of work together.
Yeah. Now we're going to have a difficult discussion, I assume, because you said mid-market. And I have had discussions with more vendors I can count on my fingers about what the definition is of mid-market.
Yes.
Because mid-market in the US is something totally different than in Europe.
Right.
So can we define mid-market a bit better?
I mean, I would say probably under 5,000 employees is usually the sweet spot for ServiceNow for mid-market, but yeah, it's going to be different from region to region.
And where do we start? 500, 200? Because there's under 5,000 is a really big market. So there's also I think a sweet spot where you can start with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the sweet spot for ServiceNow in that space, probably 1,000 to 5,000. Once you get beyond that, then I think customers will still use the same SKU, but again, they'll be adding on these end-to-end workflows for hire, retire, source to pay, and these really deep workflows that we have as well.
Yeah, so this product starts at when you have 1,000 employees or something.
Yeah, something like that, I think.
Okay, that's good to know because that defines where you.
Yes.
And this is a first step where ServiceNow says we're going to mid-market, and if this is successful, you might even consider
Yeah, I
going
mean,
lower.
we have a lot of standard products for different areas of our business that certainly also are going more into mid-market as well. So it's definitely, I'd say, an untapped opportunity for ServiceNow to move into that.
It's all AI based, I assume, because that's where it's all about. This week.
So I mean, the key components of it is conversational AI for the intake. So if you think the way we used to do request intake before, you would capture all the needed information for a requisition in a form, right? And you'd have to fill in a bunch of different fields. It would get submitted, and then we would route that to the appropriate line of business based on business logic and rules. Now you can do this all in conversational AI, right? So bimodal, back and forth conversation that you have with the agent, and then it actually does the routing. It's actually capturing everything you normally would put into a form. Now there are no forms, right? So this is kind of a cool point I think we're in the industry is you're starting to see things like forms disappear. And we've been using form-based applications and enterprise software for decades. So it's a pretty big shift.
Yeah, I'm processing what you all just told me and what I heard this week, and I noticed that in the past it was really hard for organizations to grasp what ServiceNow is exactly doing because the workflows made it a bit hard to define what it was. You know? You could do so much.
Yes.
And now you're positioning yourself in the CRM business. You're now positioning yourself in a mid-market with a nice smaller bundle. Isn't this a way to that ServiceNow grow a bit faster by having these really definable products in your portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple growth vectors, right? There's obviously regional expansion. We're still just getting started there.
Okay.
There's industry expansion. There's line of business expansion. So yes, there's CRM, there's HR, there's IT, but now there's also finance, supply chain, procurement. So we launched that 2 years ago, and that's really taking off really well. And now we've always been pretty focused in large enterprise and now starting to expand in mid-market. So there's multiple vectors of growth going on right now.
And which vector are you the most excited about then?
Well, I mean, as an ERP guy for 25 years, finance, supply chain, and procurement, it's a market that's screaming for innovation. Because when you take a look at any type of process there, it's tailor-made for ServiceNow. You basically have a lot of departments, finance, procurement, supply chain team that will have a set of usually multiple instances of ERP, a lot of custom point solutions, and then just kind of workarounds. And we used to joke, I worked for the 2 largest ERP players back in the day. Excel was probably the biggest ERP, right? A lot of finance teams using Excel for a clearinghouse, a lot of manual work. So when you think about that, they built up these departmental stacks, but that's not how a process works, right? Even when you're about to buy something from procurement, you need finance, you need legal involved in some different points. You need to do some risk assessment of suppliers, ESG check, things like that. So there's multiple teams that get involved. But those incumbent systems were just designed for one narrow transactional area. So we fit on top and we bring all those teams, all those systems and data together in one unified process. So that's what we've been doing for a little over 2 years with finance and supply chain. Now we have AI agents on top of that, right? So like I said, the request intake, now that becomes a conversational AI actually replacing the form. We've had playbooks to kind of design these end-to-end processes, but still you would create a case. It would go to a back office team. They'd have to work down the cases. Gen AI was a little bit better because you got some summarization, some recommendation. Now an AI agent can actually sit on the playbook and run the playbook, run that task, until it reaches a threshold where it needs to hand off to a human being on the team. So the amount of automation and savings that we can drive in finance, procurement, supply chain is huge.
Okay. But do you see ServiceNow then as a competitor to most of those ERP players?
Well, it's completely different, right? So their system of record, they're running a transaction and then recording that transaction on a GL or a materials ledger. What are we doing? We're a system of action, right? So we're built for those teams to work together inside of a process. We'll pull data from some of those underlying systems and then trigger the transaction down below. And it's really up to our customers. Some of our customers have said, you know, this system of record component, we'd love ServiceNow to develop here because we're not seeing value or innovation from one of those legacy systems. And if we hear that from enough customers, we start to build in those areas. And that's kind of one of our values, is that we could come up on top of that mess of applications in the back office, bring a unified process. But then over time, what we find is a lot of customers say, well, now that we're working and running just in ServiceNow, there's multiple point solutions we can start to sunset, which bring additional savings. Or if you're starting to get so much value out of ServiceNow, what type of investment do you want to look at in this underlying ERP? And that's where we have a partnership with Rimini Street, right? Where it's their bread and butter. They come in, they'll cut the maintenance of your ERP in half. For a typical S&P 500 customer, that could be $5-8 million savings of a year. And now let's reinvest that in ServiceNow.
And how do they do that?
So they provide third-party support services.
Okay.
So typically you would pay support to your ERP vendor. You could turn that off, work with Rimini Street. It's about half the price. And then use that savings you used to spend just on maintaining maybe a system you've been running for 20, 25 years. Now you could take some of that savings and reinvest that into innovation.
Yeah, because it's really hard to take away the ERP in the end.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, I think ERP is not going away. You're always going to need a general ledger. You're going to need some of these core transactions.
And it's not a position ServiceNow wants to fill either.
No, not today.
No. So, yeah, and I know you worked with them. They are still innovating, maybe not at the speed of others, and it depends on which ERP vendor we're talking about, because
Correct.
I visit many of them and there
Yes.
are huge differences.
Yes.
But I also think it's a really hard space to innovate, because really slow processes and they're really difficult sometimes to understand.
Yes.
So how do you get those companies aboard to say just use your system of records and
Well, I mean, it's a different thing, right? So we've been pretty open at the conference here, right? That's not always going to be our AI agents. Our agents need to play well with other agents.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the original setup that I spoke about. So a lot of those incumbent systems, they're going to have AI agents, but they're going to be able to run a transaction, right? A very narrow transaction. They've never been good at working across systems and across teams. That's what our agents are going to excel with. So just how we tap data or trigger some transactions in an underlying system using workflow data fabric, our agent might have to speak to an agent from one of those ERP systems to trigger a transaction. But ours, I think, will always excel when it's cutting across teams to really bring a unified process.
Okay. So to summarize a bit, you're going after the mid-market with your core business suite and trying to innovate legacy software with your agents and workflows to make that software work a bit better.
Absolutely, while saving a lot of money for customers.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, for having me here and being on our show.
Yeah.
And, I hope to speak to you on the next knowledge and see where it's all at, because I'm really wondering how that mid-market will develop.
Absolutely. Let's do part 2 next year.
Okay. Thank you for watching and see you at the next one.